On a freezing morning outside Pine Hollow, Route 19 was packed with cars, yet almost no one slowed down. In the frozen ditch beside the road, an old man lay beside a twisted bicycle, scattered oranges, and a secret buried in the mud. People passed by and turned their eyes away, as if that burden belonged to someone else. Then a retired Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd drove around the bend and saw everything. Elias Mercer stopped his truck immediately, stepped into the freezing wind, and ran toward the ditch. But when Elias tried to lift the old man, Ranger suddenly began digging beside the broken bicycle. What the dog found under the mud would expose a secret the whole town had been trying to bury. Tell us where you're watching from. Leave your thoughts after the story, and please like and subscribe to help us reach more subscribers. Route 19 lay gray and narrow outside Pine Hollow, Virginia, a road built for ordinary errands but used every morning like a battlefield of impatience. Low fog dragged itself across the fields. Frost silvered the grass along the ditch. The bare branches of the roadside maples leaned over the pavement, as if they were old witnesses too tired to speak. Headlights cut through the mist, one after another, each car carrying someone late for work, late for school, late for a doctor's appointment, late for a life that felt more urgent than whatever waited beside the road. Near the bend, a bicycle lay twisted against the gravel shoulder. Its front wheels still turned a little, not spinning freely anymore, just ticking once every few seconds like a small broken clock. A paper grocery bag had split open beside it. Oranges rolled across the shoulder, bright and helpless against the frozen mud. One fruit reached the edge of the lane, paused there for half a breath, then disappeared beneath a passing tire. No one stopped. Some slowed. That was worse in a way. They slowed enough to see, enough to understand that the shape in the ditch was not trash, not a fallen coat, not some harmless thing the road had shaken loose. It was a man. Walter Finch, 76 years old, lay half on his side in the shallow ditch, one arm tucked beneath him at an unnatural angle. He was a thin old man with narrow shoulders, white hair flattened by damp grass, and long, delicate hands that seemed made for music rather than cold mud. His face, pale beneath the bruising already rising near one temple, carried the fragile dignity of a man who had spent his life trying not to be a burden. Walter played the organ at St. Mark's Church. Every Sunday, even when his knuckles swelled with arthritis, he sat at the old wooden bench and coaxed hymns from pipes that complained like elderly men waking from a nap. People called him stubborn. He preferred faithful. That morning, he had been riding home from the pharmacy with oranges for his daughter Claire. Now his glasses were cracked. His right sleeve was dark with a small but frightening stain. His breath came shallow, each one leaving a thin cloud in the air before vanishing. Walter tried to lift his hand. A sedan passed. He tried again. A delivery van swerved slightly around the crushed orange and continued down the road. Inside those vehicles, people made quick agreements with themselves. Someone else will call. It's too dangerous to stop here. I don't know first aid. I have my child in the car. I'm already late. They were not monsters. That was the saddest part. Most of them would have fed a stray cat, held the door for an old woman, donated $5 to a storm fund if the cashier asked gently enough. But suffering on the side of a road is different from suffering in a story. It asks for more than sympathy. It asks for interruption. And interruption is where goodness often begins to tremble. A blue minivan slowed almost to a crawl. Behind the wheel was Maren Doyle, 39, a hospice nurse with tired gray eyes and dark blonde hair twisted carelessly behind her head. She had the small, worn-down look of a woman who spent her life beside beds where people whispered their last fears. Her scrub jacket was teal, her hands were capable, and her heart was not hard. She saw Walter. She saw the bicycle. From the back seat, her little nephew coughed hard into his sleeve, and the car behind her honked. Maren's fingers tightened on the wheel. Not here, she thought. Not in the middle of this road. Someone else must have already called. Then she drove on. A younger man in a gray compact car lifted his phone and recorded for 3 seconds through the windshield. Troy Kellerman, 22, thin-faced and nervous, had grown up in the age where witnessing something often meant capturing it before understanding it. He told himself the video might help. Then a truck behind him flashed its lights, and fear pressed his foot onto the gas. The road swallowed them all. Walter's eyes opened halfway. The world above him was a blur of fog, tires, and indifferent metal. He could hear engines. He could hear the ticking bicycle wheel. He could hear his own breath, too soft to matter. Then, Far down the road, an old pickup came through the mist. Elias Mercer drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near a paper cup of black coffee gone lukewarm. He was 58, tall at around 6 feet, built with the solid economy of a man shaped by weather, military discipline, and years of carrying things he did not speak about. His shoulders filled the faded green military jacket he wore every winter. The collar was frayed, the left cuff worn thin, but Elias kept it as carefully as another man might keep a medal. His face was square and stern at first glance, with a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and skin browned by sun, wind, and old deployments. His dark brown hair was cut short, the top slightly ruffled as though the cold had pushed it backward, while silver showed at both temples. A neat, rough stubble lined his jaw, not careless exactly, just honest. His blue-gray eyes did not move quickly. They settled on things, weighed them, remembered them. Beside him sat Ranger. Ranger was a 6-year-old German shepherd, black and tan, with a heavy dark saddle across his back and warm golden fur along his chest and legs. His ears stood tall, though the right one had a small notch along the outer edge. A narrow streak of brighter gold ran from his forehead down his muzzle like a crooked flash of sunlight. He wore an old brown leather collar with a metal tag that read Ranger, and in public he sometimes wore an olive harness marked Reddard K9. Ranger was not a loud dog. He did not waste sound. He watched the world as if every movement had meaning and every silence might be hiding a command. That morning, he had been quiet for miles. Then his head lifted. Elias glanced at him. "What is it?" Ranger's body went still, not tense with fear but fixed with purpose. His ears tilted forward, his nose angled toward the ditch ahead. Elias followed the dog's gaze and saw nothing at first but fog, gravel, and the shape of the road bending past the fields. Then he saw the bicycle, then the oranges, then the hand. His chest tightened. For 1 second, a shameful second, Elias wanted to keep driving. He knew what stopping meant. Stopping meant the morning would no longer belong to him. It meant stepping out of the heated cab into danger, traffic, blood, questions, statements, hospitals, strangers. It meant accepting that someone else's worst moment had reached through his windshield and put its hand on his shoulder. He was tired. His left shoulder ached where old scar tissue stiffened in cold weather. His porch roof still leaked. He needed nails, sealant, coffee filters, and one quiet day where the past did not rise up wearing another man's face. But the past did rise, a phone ringing in the dark. Jonah Reed's name glowing on the screen, rain tapping the window. Elias sitting alone in a room that smelled of whiskey and old grief, watching the phone vibrate until it went still. He had listened to the voicemail the next morning. Too late. Jonah had been a former teammate, a quiet man with tired eyes, and a habit of fixing things for old people who could not pay him properly. In the message, Jonah had said there was something wrong in Pine Hollow, something with land deeds, old folks, a place called Gray Lake. His voice had not sounded scared until the last sentence. "Eli, if you get this, call me back tonight, please." Elias never called back that night. Jonah was found dead the next morning in what the local report called a single vehicle accident. Ranger barked once. It was short, sharp, almost offended. Elias looked at him. The dog was not begging. That would have been easier. Ranger was judging him with the silent clarity only a dog can carry. No excuses, no philosophy, no convenient little courtroom inside the skull. Just the road, the man, the choice. Elias hit the hazard lights and pulled onto the shoulder. Behind him, someone honked. "Yeah," Elias muttered, putting the truck in park. God forbid, mercy slow traffic. Ranger did not move until Elias gave the command. "Stay." The dog obeyed, but his eyes stayed locked on the ditch. Elias stepped out. Cold struck his face at once, clean and mean. The wind from passing cars shoved at his jacket. Tires hissed over damp pavement only a few feet away. He raised one hand toward traffic, palm out, and moved down the shoulder with the careful speed of a man who knew panic could kill twice. Halfway to the ditch, Ranger made a low sound. Elias looked back. The dog was no longer staring at Walter. He was staring at the mud near the bicycle's rear wheel. For a moment, Elias saw something in Ranger's posture that pulled the air from his lungs. It was the same way the dog had once frozen in a burned-out village overseas, not at the danger everyone could see, but at the thing buried just beneath it, because Ranger was not reacting only to the injured man. He had found something else. Elias forced himself to turn back to Walter first. A living man mattered more than whatever secret the mud was keeping. He climbed down the ditch and knelt beside the old man. "Sir, can you hear me?" Walter's eyelids fluttered. "My name is Elias. I'm going to help you. Don't try to move." Walter's lips parted. At first, only a breath came out. Then his left hand, cold and trembling, caught the cuff of Elias's jacket with surprising desperation. "Don't," Walter whispered. Elias leaned closer. "Don't what?" Walter's eyes opened wider, not fully clear but filled with terrible effort. "Don't let them take the list." Elias went still. "What list?" Walter's fingers tightened once, then loosened. His head rolled slightly to the side. He was breathing, but he had slipped back into unconsciousness. Elias pulled out his phone and called 911. His voice changed as soon as the dispatcher answered, becoming calm, clipped, and exact. Location: male victim, bicycle crash or vehicle strike, breathing shallow, possible head trauma, possible fracture, traffic hazard, need ambulance and law enforcement. While he spoke, a blue minivan appeared in the distance, slowed, and this time pulled over. Marin stepped out, her face pale. She looked smaller outside the vehicle, swallowed by the fog and the guilt already gathering around her shoulders. "I'm a nurse," she called, voice shaking. "I should have stopped." Elias looked at her for 1 second, not gently, not cruelly, then stopped now. She flinched, then nodded and hurried toward her trunk for a blanket. Above them, Ranger barked again, not at traffic, not at Marin, but at the mud. "Ranger, stay," Elias ordered. The German shepherd obeyed for 2 breaths. Then, with a controlled urgency Elias knew too well, Ranger lowered his muzzle and began scraping at the mud beside the bicycle. "Ranger." The dog did not stop. Elias looked at Walter, then at Marin as she approached with a blanket. "Keep him warm. Don't move his neck." Marin nodded, kneeling, her nurse's hands finally remembering themselves. Elias climbed back up the ditch toward Ranger. The dog had hooked something with one paw, not digging wildly, but working at a half-buried corner of brown paper. Elias crouched and saw a soaked envelope pressed into the mud near the bicycle wheel, nearly hidden beneath a crushed orange and a smear of frost-black dirt. He did not rip it free at once. Old training moved through him. He took a photo with his phone, then another wider shot with the bicycle, the ditch, and the envelope in frame. Only after that did he put on a pair of gloves from the small first aid kit in his truck door and ease the envelope from the mud. It was wet, torn at one corner, but still sealed. Across the front, written in a shaky hand, were the words, "If I don't make it, give this to Claire." Elias stared at the sentence. The fog seemed to press closer. Down in the ditch, Walter breathed faintly beneath the blanket. Marin whispered to him, trying to keep him anchored. Traffic still moved past, slower now, but still moving, as if the road had only reluctantly admitted something human had happened there. Elias looked at Ranger. The dog stood beside him, ears forward, eyes fixed not on the envelope but beyond the bend. Elias followed his gaze. A black pickup, far ahead, rolled slowly around the curve. It did not stop. It did not speed away dramatically. It simply disappeared into the gray morning like it had never been there at all. Elias folded the envelope carefully into a clean plastic bag from his kit. Then he looked back at Walter Finch and understood that this was no longer just a man in a ditch. This was a message someone had tried to bury before it reached the living. The first siren did not come quickly enough. To Elias Mercer, kneeling in the ditch beside Walter Finch, every second seemed to stretch like wire pulled too tight. The old man's breath was still there, thin and uneven, but present. That mattered. On mornings like this, when cold pressed into the bones and traffic hissed past like a river of steel, present was not a small word. Present meant there was still a door not fully closed. "Stay with me, Walter," Elias said. He did not know the old man well enough to call him by his first name, yet the name had already stopped feeling like a stranger's. A man became known quickly when his pulse was under your fingers. Marin Doyle knelt on the other side of the ditch, tucking the emergency blanket around Walter's shoulders. Her teal scrub jacket was damp at the knees now, her blonde hair slipping loose from its careless knot. She looked like someone who had spent years caring for the dying, yet had only just discovered how terrible it felt to almost become one of the people who passed them by. "I should have stopped," she whispered. Elias kept 2 fingers against Walter's wrist. "Then stop now," Marin swallowed. The words struck her harder because they were not shouted. She nodded, wiped one shaking hand against her scrub pants, and leaned closer to Walter. "Mr. Finch, my name is Marin. I'm a nurse. You're not alone, okay?" "You're not alone." The old man did not answer, but his eyelids moved. Above them, Ranger stood at the edge of the ditch, controlled but restless. The German shepherd's black and gold coat lifted slightly in the cold wind. The notch in his right ear gave him the look of a veteran who had argued with the world and kept most of himself intact. He did not bark now. His attention moved between the road, Elias, the injured man, and the sealed plastic bag in Elias's jacket pocket. Elias felt that last glance. He had taken the envelope carefully, photographed the spot where Ranger had found it, and sealed it away without opening it. Procedure mattered, evidence mattered, but so did the words Walter had forced through bloodless lips. Don't let them take the list. That sentence had weight. Not the weight of confusion, the weight of warning. A horn screamed from the road. Elias climbed up from the ditch, raised both arms, and stepped onto the gravel shoulder. A silver sedan swerved too close, its driver throwing him an angry glare as though Elias had personally arranged the morning's inconvenience. "Slow down," Elias shouted. The sedan vanished into the fog. A young man stood by the roadside with his phone still in his hand. He was Troy Kellerman, 22, tall but narrow in the shoulders, with a pale, anxious face and brown hair flattened under a cheap knit cap. He had the unsure posture of a generation trained to witness through glass. His gray jacket hung open despite the cold. His mouth kept opening as if apologies were trying to form, but could not decide which one deserved to leave first. "Put the phone away," Elias said. Troy blinked. I was just recording in case." "In case what?" The road needed a memory. The young man's cheeks reddened. Elias pointed 50 yards back toward the bend. "Stand there, wave cars down. If anybody stops, tell them an ambulance is coming. If you want to help, help with your hands." Troy looked toward Walter, then back at his phone. Shame moved across his face, raw and young. He shoved the phone into his pocket and ran toward the bend. It was not redemption, not yet, but it was a first step. More cars slowed now. Not many stopped. Most crawled past just long enough for faces to turn toward the ditch. Elias saw curiosity, fear, discomfort, and something worse. Relief. Relief that someone else had already crossed the line. Relief that they were free to continue being good people later. Marin looked up from Walter. Her eyes were wet. "He's cold. Pulse is weak, but I can feel it. Keep talking to him," Elias said. "Don't let him drift if he can hear you." She nodded and bent close again. "Walter, can you hear the traffic? I hate it too. But the ambulance is coming. You just keep breathing despite every fool who drove past." That almost made Elias smile. Almost. A white pickup pulled over behind Elias's truck. A middle-aged man in a hardware store jacket got out but hesitated near his door, fear pinning him in place. Elias gave him a job too. Hazards on, reflective triangles if he had them, keep cars wide. The man obeyed with visible gratitude, as if being told what to do had saved him from the shame of not knowing who to be. Then the cruiser arrived. Not a state cruiser. Local. It rolled onto the shoulder with measured confidence, lights flashing red and blue against the fog. Deputy Dale Harker stepped out. Harker was 49, broad-shouldered and heavy through the middle, with a tan sheriff's jacket pulled tight over his uniform. His hair was cut short and sandy brown, his mustache trimmed with care. His face was ruddy from too much coffee and too many winters spent inside idling patrol cars. He looked ordinary in the way small-town authority often looked ordinary, familiar enough to be trusted, tired enough to be forgiven. He chewed something as he walked over. "Cinnamon gum," Elias guessed, strong enough to cover old tobacco. "You the caller?" Harker asked. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Elias Mercer, victims breathing, possible head trauma, possible arm fracture, exposure. Ambulance is still out." Harker glanced down into the ditch. His face made the proper shape of concern, but his first question did not match it. "Was he conscious when you got here?" Elias paused half a beat. Briefly. "Say anything?" Marin looked up from Walter. Elias did not answer too fast. He was confused. Harker's eyes shifted to him. Confused how, like a man hit by a vehicle in freezing weather. The deputy's jaw tightened, then relaxed into a polite smile. "Fair enough." Ranger moved then. Not much. Just 2 steps. He placed himself near Elias's left side, not blocking Harker entirely, but making a quiet wall between the deputy and the ditch. His ears angled forward. His nose worked once, slowly. Harker looked down at him. "That your dog? Ranger? Military? Retired?" Harker gave a small chuckle. "Aren't we all?" But Ranger did not soften. His eyes stayed on the deputy's boots. Not a bark, not a dramatic leap. Just a dog's quiet refusal to dismiss what every human wanted to call ordinary. Elias followed the line of Ranger's attention and saw dried reddish mud pressed into the grooves of Harker's right boot. Beside it, darker stains clung near the heel, giving off the faint industrial tang Elias had noticed earlier near the road. Old diesel, wet gravel, machine oil. It proved nothing, but Ranger had noticed it. And Ranger did not waste attention. The ambulance arrived before Elias could think further. 2 EMTs moved fast from the vehicle. The lead was Dana Whitlock. A compact woman in her mid-30s with copper-brown skin, dark hair braided tight under a knit cap, and the blunt calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic was expensive. Her partner, Len Morris, was older and lean, with gray stubble and knees that cracked audibly when he crouched. "What do we have?" Dana asked. Elias gave the report cleanly. No drama, no theories, just facts. Dana nodded once. "Good work, sir. Step back a little," Elias did. Marin helped where Dana allowed her, then moved aside when professional hands took over. Her face showed relief and humiliation in equal measure. She knew enough to understand how close Walter had come to dying with traffic for a witness. As the EMT stabilized Walter, Harker moved closer to Elias. "Any personal effects? Bicycle, groceries, glasses, anything else?" Elias looked at him. Harker smiled lightly. "Just trying to keep track of the scene. State police are on their way?" Harker's smile thinned. "This is county jurisdiction unless there's a fatality or request for assistance." "I requested assistance." "Did you?" "Road hazard. Possible hit and run, elderly victim, evidence on scene. I figured more eyes wouldn't hurt." For the first time, Harker's politeness became something with teeth under it. "Evidence?" Elias let a passing truck fill the silence before answering. "Tire marks. Impact pattern. The usual." Harker held his gaze, then looked away first. Down in the ditch, Walter stirred as they lifted him onto the backboard. His eyes opened, cloudy but urgent. His fingers searched the air. Elias stepped closer despite Dana's warning look. Walter found his sleeve again. "Church," the old man breathed. "I hear you." Walter's lips trembled. "Not all. Who pray?" His eyes rolled, then sharpened with one last piece of strength. "Have clean hands." Then he was gone again into unconsciousness. Marin covered her mouth. Even Dana looked up. Harker stood very still. The words had landed among them like something thrown through stained glass. "Not all who pray have clean hands." Elias felt the envelope in his jacket pocket as if it had grown warmer. The EMTs loaded Walter into the ambulance. Marin tried to follow, but Dana stopped her gently. "Family only." "I'm not family," Marin said. "No," Elias said quietly. "But you came back." Marin looked at him. That seemed to hurt her more than blame. The ambulance doors closed. The siren rose, and Walter Finch disappeared toward Pine Hollow General, under red light and fog. For a few seconds, no one moved. The scene had changed shape. Without Walter's body in the ditch, the road almost looked ordinary again. A bicycle, mud, crushed fruit, men standing around in cold weather. It was frightening how quickly a place tried to erase what it had held. Harker turned to Elias. "If the old man gave you anything, now would be the time." Elias heard Troy's voice far behind him, warning another car to slow down. He heard Ranger's breath at his side. He heard the faint clink of Marin folding the emergency blanket with hands still shaking. Elias said, "I'm waiting for state police." Harker's eyes hardened for less than a second. Then the friendly mask returned. "Suit yourself, but don't make this more complicated than it has to be." "It already is." A phone buzzed in Elias's pocket. "Unknown number," he answered without taking his eyes off Harker. "Mercer." A woman's voice came through, precise and controlled. "Mr. Mercer, this is Trooper Amanda Reyes with Virginia State Police. Dispatch relayed your request and your note about possible evidence." Elias turned slightly away from Harker. "Yes, Mom." Amanda Reyes sounded like someone who did not waste syllables. "Do not open anything. Do not hand it to anyone unless you are documenting transfer of custody. Photograph the condition if you haven't already. Meet me at Pine Hollow General. I'll take your statement there." Elias looked toward Harker, who was pretending not to listen. "Understood." "One more thing," Amanda said. "If Deputy Harker is on scene, remain polite, but keep the item with you until I arrive." Elias's eyes narrowed. "You know him?" A pause. "Small but real." "I know the county." The line clicked dead. Elias lowered the phone. Harker smiled. "Everything all right? State police want to speak at the hospital." "Of course they do." Elias opened his truck door and gave Ranger the hand signal to load up. The German Shepherd jumped into the passenger seat, but stayed facing outward, watching Harker through the windshield. Marin approached before Elias could close the door. "Mr. Mercer." "Elias, I don't know if it matters, but I saw him before I came back. I saw Mr. Finch, and I kept driving. If someone asks, I'll say that." Elias studied her. "It matters." Her eyes filled again, but she did not look away this time. "Is he going to live? I don't know." Marin nodded as if she deserved that uncertainty. Elias climbed into the truck. As he pulled away, Troy stood near the bend, waving both arms, forcing traffic to slow. His phone was no longer in his hand. In the side mirror, Elias saw Harker remain on the shoulder. The deputy watched the truck leave, his face unreadable beneath the red and blue wash of his cruiser lights. Then Harker turned away, took out his own phone, and walked toward the ditch where Walter had lain. His voice was low enough that no one nearby heard much. Only a few words carried through the cold. "The old man's alive," Harker said, "and the dog found something." Pine Hollow General Hospital looked too small for a morning this heavy. It sat on a low hill above town, built of red brick darkened by decades of rain, with a row of bare maple trees trembling outside the emergency entrance. The automatic doors opened and closed with soft sighs, letting in gusts of cold air and the smell of wet pavement. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over pale floors. A vending machine rattled near the waiting area, offering burnt coffee to people who had run out of prayers. Elias Mercer entered with Ranger at his left side. The German Shepherd wore his olive-retired K9 harness now, the strap snug against his black and gold coat. He moved with quiet discipline, not pulling, not sniffing at every stranger but watching. His amber eyes followed nurses, gurneys, swinging doors, and the small tremors in people's hands. Hospitals unsettled many dogs. Ranger treated them like forward operating bases with better lighting and worse coffee. Elias kept one hand near the sealed plastic bag inside his jacket. The envelope had not been opened. He had photographed it, protected it, and brought it here because Walter Finch's own handwriting had named Claire. But the longer it rested against Elias's ribs, the more it felt like something alive. A woman rushed through the emergency entrance just as Elias reached the waiting area. She was in her late 40s, around 5'5", slender but not fragile, with chestnut brown hair cut to her shoulders and pulled into a hurried low tie. Her coat was slate blue wool, buttoned wrong at the top as if she had dressed while fear stood behind her. Her face carried Walter's shape around the eyes, pale blue, long-lashed, and too honest to hide panic well. A small silver pendant hung at her throat, shaped like an organ key, and she kept touching it without seeming to know. "Walter Finch," she said to the nurse at the desk. "My father. I'm Claire Finch." The nurse asked for identification in the soft voice hospitals, used when the world has already become unkind enough. Claire fumbled through her purse, dropped her keys, picked them up, and nearly dropped them again. Elias stepped forward, but did not crowd her. "Mrs. Finch." Claire turned. "Who are you?" "Elias Mercer. I found your father." Her face changed. Fear found a target and became anger because anger was easier to hold. "Where is he?" "They brought him in a few minutes ago. He was alive when they loaded him." "That's not an answer." "No," Elias said. "It's the only honest one I have." Claire stared at him. Then her eyes moved to Ranger, then to Elias's jacket, then back to his face. She had the wary intelligence of someone who had spent years caring for an aging parent and had learned that not every helpful stranger was harmless. The nurse at the desk told Claire a doctor would come out as soon as possible. That phrase did not comfort anyone. Claire stepped away from the desk, hugged her arms across her chest, and looked at Elias again. "They said you had something of his." Elias did not reach for the envelope immediately. "Yes." "Then give it to me." "I will, once Trooper Reyes gets here." Her expression hardened. "Trooper? State police? Why are state police involved?" "'Cause your father asked me not to let someone take what he was carrying." Claire went still. Beneath anger, something colder moved. "What did he say?" Elias lowered his voice. He said, "Don't let them take the list." Claire's mouth parted, but no words came out. Ranger shifted beside Elias, not restless, only alert. His right ear with the small notch tilted toward the hall where nurses moved behind double doors. Claire noticed the dog's attention and seemed to resent it, as if even Ranger knew more than she did. "My father is old," she said. "He says strange things sometimes. He hears rumors, writes notes, decides half the town is conspiring if someone moves the hymnals. He didn't sound confused about this. You knew him for 3 minutes in a ditch. That was enough to know he was afraid." Claire's eyes flashed. "People are often afraid when they're bleeding in the cold, Mr. Mercer." Elias accepted that. He had no right to demand trust from a daughter whose father might be dying behind doors she could not enter. She pointed toward his jacket. "If you have something of his, I want it." "A good man would call the police," she said, voice tight. "He wouldn't carry secrets around in his coat." Elias looked toward the emergency doors before answering. "I've seen secrets die after being placed on the right desk in the wrong room." Claire's anger faltered, not because she believed him, but because something in his voice sounded too old to be theatrical. Before she could answer, a woman in a dark Navy State Police jacket entered the waiting area. Trooper Amanda Reyes was 41, about 5'7", with a compact, straight-backed frame and dark hair twisted into a low bun. A few early silver strands marked her temples. Her brown eyes moved once across the room and seemed to take inventory of everything. Elias's hands, Claire's posture, Ranger's harness, the nearest exit, the nurse pretending not to listen. She carried a black spiral notebook instead of relying only on her phone, and there was a severity about her that did not feel cruel. It felt clean. Mr. Mercer? Yes, Miss Finch? Claire nodded. I'm Trooper Reyes. I'm sorry about your father. Before we discuss anything else, I need to secure whatever Mr. Mercer recovered at the scene. Claire looked relieved and insulted at the same time. So he really didn't give it to the deputy? Amanda's eyes flicked once to Elias. No, that was wise. Elias did not smile. Amanda led them to a small consultation room off the waiting area. It had a round table, 4 chairs, a box of tissues, and a print of a sunrise over a lake, so bland it seemed designed to offend no one. Ranger sat just inside the door, his body angled toward the hallway. Elias placed a plastic bag on the table. Amanda photographed it, noted the time, asked Elias to describe where it had been found, then had him sign a preliminary statement. She wore gloves when she handled the bag and opened the outer seal carefully, leaving the muddy envelope itself untouched, except where necessary. Chain of custody begins now, she said. From this moment, no one handles it casually. Not you, Mr. Mercer, not Miss Finch, not Deputy Harker. The last name landed quietly. Claire caught it. Why did you say him specifically? Amanda did not answer directly. Because he was on scene. That was all. But Elias heard the door. That sentence did not open. Inside the envelope were several folded papers protected by a thinner plastic sleeve, a trick of an old man who did not trust rain, pockets, or people. Amanda slid them out one by one, a list of 17 names, copies of property transfer documents, photographs of elderly residents sitting in a bright common room with blank expressions, a receipt from Gray Lake Home, a handwritten note. If something happens, ask Marin about room 214, and one line circled so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. Calvin Rusk Development Trust. Claire sank slowly into a chair. No, she whispered. Elias stood beside the wall, arms folded, watching her face change as memory rearranged itself. He saw the moment she stopped thinking of her father as difficult and began wondering if he had been lonely in the truth. He kept saying someone was buying the old people, Claire said. That's what he called it, buying the old people. I told him it was just paperwork, refinancing, assisted living, things he didn't understand. Her hand rose to the little organ key pendant. I told him he was scaring himself. Amanda's voice softened by 1 degree. Miss Finch, did your father ever mention Calvin Rusk directly? Claire looked at the circled name. Everyone knows Calvin. He funds half the town. A knock came at the consultation room door. All 3 adults looked up. A nurse opened it halfway. Mrs. Finch? There's someone here asking after your father, Mr. Rusk. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ranger stood. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply rose from the floor with such quiet certainty that the room seemed to narrow around him, delicate as a breath but sharp enough to stop the heart. Before Elias saw the man, before Claire heard his voice, before Amanda closed the folder, Ranger had already turned toward the hallway as if some old scent had stepped through the hospital doors wearing flowers. Claire wiped her face quickly. Calvin came. The man appeared behind the nurse with a white bouquet in one hand. Calvin Rusk was 52, neatly built, not tall enough to dominate a room by size, but polished enough to do it anyway. His blonde gray hair was combed back with expensive restraint. His skin was smooth, his jaw clean-shaven, his smile warm in the practiced way of men who had learned that kindness could be made to look like a business card. He wore a camel-colored wool coat over a charcoal sweater and white shirt. A burgundy cashmere scarf sat perfectly at his throat, and thin brown leather gloves covered his hands. Claire, he said softly, I came as soon as I heard. His voice carried concern the way a silver tray carries tea, beautifully, steadily, and without spilling. Claire stood, confused by grief and habit. Calvin, I am so sorry. He stepped closer, offering the flowers. Walter is part of this town's soul. If there is anything my office can do, medical expenses, transportation, anything, you call me. It was a generous sentence. In another room, on another day, it might have been comforting. Ranger took half a step forward. Elias gave a low hand signal, and the dog stopped. Calvin looked down. Ah, a working dog. Retired, Elias said. So few of us really are. Calvin smiled as if they shared something. Calvin Rusk, Elias Mercer. Calvin extended a gloved hand. Elias did not take it. The smile remained, but a small muscle moved near Calvin's eye. Amanda stepped in smoothly. Mr. Rusk, this is a private family area. Of course, Trooper. I meant no intrusion. He turned to Claire again. Your father and I disagreed on some town matters, but I respected him deeply. He loved Pine Hollow. Claire clutched the flowers awkwardly. She almost wanted to believe him. Elias could see it. Grief makes people hungry for any voice that sounds steady. Ranger lowered his nose slightly, not toward Calvin's face, toward his coat, then toward the flowers. Elias noticed the bouquet was tied with a white ribbon, and tucked among the lilies was a tiny card from Rusk Development Trust, embossed in gold. Too clean, too ready. Calvin shifted the flowers from one hand to the other. As he removed a glove, a thin scratch showed across the back of his right hand, red and fresh against pale skin. Elias's eyes went there. Calvin noticed. Rose bushes outside my office, he said pleasantly. They defend themselves better than most attorneys. Amanda wrote something in her black notebook. Calvin's gaze touched the notebook, then returned to Elias. I hope Mr. Finch didn't frighten you with any of his theories. Age can turn worry into conviction. A cruel thing, really. Claire stiffened. My father is hurt, she said, not absent. Calvin bowed his head. Forgive me, I chose the wrong words. He had not. Elias knew men like him. They chose words the way careful shooters chose distance. The doctor came then, sparing Claire from a response. Dr. Lillian Park was a small woman in her early 50s, with straight black hair cut to her chin, silver-rimmed glasses, and the steady, tired face of someone who had delivered both miracles and endings without believing she controlled either. She explained that Walter was alive but critical. Head trauma, broken arm, hypothermia, internal bruising. They were moving him for imaging and possibly surgery. Claire gripped the back of the chair. Can I see him? Briefly, Dr. Park said. Only you for now. Claire looked at Elias, then Amanda, then Ranger, as if she had entered a story she had not agreed to read. When she left with the doctor, Amanda gathered the documents and sealed them into an evidence pouch. Calvin lingered at the doorway. I imagine this morning was difficult for you, Mr. Mercer. Elias said nothing. Pine Hollow is a peaceful town. Calvin continued, but peaceful towns can become dangerous when frightened people start connecting unrelated tragedies. That happen often? More often than you'd think. His smile thinned. Old men sometimes misremember. Soldiers, too, there it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. A hand placed gently over the mouth of a warning bell. Elias stepped closer, just enough that Calvin's perfume could not fully hide the faint smell underneath it. Cold air, polished leather, and something sterile from an office where flowers were ordered before sympathy was felt. Careful, Elias said. Calvin's eyes cooled. With what? Thinking quiet men don't hear you. For the first time, Calvin's smile vanished completely, only for a second. Then it returned, flawless. Give Walter my prayers. He walked away down the hall, coat moving cleanly behind him. Ranger watched until he disappeared around the corner. Amanda looked at Elias. You hear what I heard? I heard a man try to sound kind while measuring the walls. Amanda closed her notebook. Good. Then we're not imagining the same thing. Claire returned 10 minutes later, pale but standing. She had seen her father through wires, tubes, swelling, and the merciful blur of medication. Whatever anger she still had toward Elias had been pushed aside by something larger. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She looked down. The color drained from her face. Amanda took one step closer. Mrs. Finch? Claire held out the phone. The message was from an unknown number. Burn the envelope. Your father got lucky once. Don't test a second time. The consultation room became very still. Amanda read it twice, then said, No one goes anywhere alone from this point forward. Out in the hallway, a soft metallic clatter broke the silence. Elias turned. Near the vending machine stood an older woman holding a pale blue tin of homemade cake. She was short, round-shouldered, with silver curls pinned by a pearl clip and a lavender cardigan buttoned over a flowered dress. Her kind face had the stunned softness of someone who had spent a lifetime apologizing before being blamed. Ruth Bellamy. Elias did not know her name yet, but Claire did. Mrs. Bellamy? The woman looked up quickly. Her blue eyes were wet. Her hands trembled so badly that the frosting inside the cake tin had slid to one side, smearing against the lid. I came to bring something for your father, Ruth said. Her voice was sweet, thin, and shaking. Then someone in the hall mentioned Route 19. The cake tin slipped another inch in her hands, and Ruth Bellamy looked toward the emergency doors with the face of a woman who had heard the road calling her by name. Marin Doyle did not sit like a guilty person. She sat like a tired one. That was what Elias noticed first in the small hospital interview room. Guilt usually made people dramatic. They cried too loudly, defended too quickly, looked for a corner where blame could be placed and left there. Marin sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she had not touched, her shoulders drawn inward beneath her teal scrub jacket, her face pale from more than the cold. She looked like a woman who had been carrying a secret in her pocket for so long that it had worn a hole through the fabric. Trooper Amanda Reyes sat across from her with the black spiral notebook open. Amanda's Navy State Police jacket was draped over the chair behind her, but even without it, she carried authority in the straightness of her back. She did not crowd Marin. She did not soften her questions too much either. Her gift was control, not comfort. Walter Finch wrote your name, Amanda said. He wrote that if something happened to him, we should ask you about room 214. Marin closed her eyes. For a moment, Elias thought she might deny everything. People often did when truth arrived wearing paperwork. But Marin opened her eyes again and said, Gray Lake home. Amanda's pen moved once. You worked there, part-time. Night rotation. 8 months last year. Marin rubbed her thumb along the rim of the cup. I still pick up occasional private hospice calls for families who can't get anyone else. Claire Finch stood near the wall, arms folded tightly across her blue wool coat. She had seen her father through glass an hour earlier, surrounded by machines, his face swollen and strange. The shock had sharpened her. Grief had not made her gentle yet. What happened there? Claire asked. Marin looked at her. Things that looked small if you wanted them to look small. No one spoke. Marin went on. Residents moved to restricted rooms after signing property papers. Medication schedules changed without clear notes. Families told their parents were sleeping, confused, agitated, unavailable. Some of those people weren't sleeping. They were scared. Claire's face tightened. My father tried to tell me. I know, Marin said quietly. He tried to tell a lot of us. The sentence entered the room and stayed there. Elias leaned against the far wall, Ranger sitting at his boot. The German shepherd's black and gold coat was still faintly damp from the fog. He remained calm, but not relaxed. His amber eyes moved from Marin to Amanda to the hallway beyond the door, as if measuring which grief might become danger first. Amanda asked, Did you report it? Marin gave a small, humorless laugh. Once. What happened? The file disappeared. My supervisor told me I had misunderstood patient privacy rules. Then someone from administration reminded me how easy it is for a nurse to lose her license if she goes through charts she isn't assigned to. Her mouth trembled, but she forced the next words out. My brother has kidney disease. I pay part of his treatment bills. I told myself I couldn't afford to be brave. Elias watched her carefully. He had known men who called themselves cowards and were not. He had known brave men who hid behind procedure while others bled. Marin was neither simple nor clean. That made her real. Claire's anger softened for one breath, then returned with a different edge. So my father was alone because everyone had a reason. Marin flinched. Elias said, Reasons don't erase damage. Marin nodded. No. Then she looked at him, and for the first time there was steadiness beneath the shame. I cried in the bathroom already. I could do that again later. Right now, tell me what helps. Amanda studied her for a moment. Then she closed the notebook halfway. Gray Lake will not open its files, just because we asked nicely. I'm requesting an emergency administrative review based on the threat to Claire, the recovered documents, and your statement. But that takes time. Marin swallowed. There's a patient there, Edith Malloy, room 214. Walter visited her twice a month. I'm still on her approved visitor list from when I handled private end-of-life support for her sister. Claire stepped forward. Then we go. Amanda raised a hand. No one is breaking into anything. No one said break, Elias said. Amanda looked at him. He lifted both palms. I'm learning. That earned him the smallest look from her. Not amusement exactly. Perhaps a warning that she owned no patience for retired warriors discovering restraint late in life. Marin said, Visiting hours run until 7. I can go in legally. Claire can come as family connected to Walter's welfare if the front desk allows it. Elias can wait in public areas. Ranger only if they approve the harness. Amanda thought it through. You don't ask about files. You don't touch medical records. You speak to Edith if she wants to speak. I'll have a trooper nearby, but I won't storm a facility without grounds that hold up. Claire looked ready to argue. Elias spoke before she could. If we make this sloppy, Calvin or Harker can call it harassment. Then Walter's work dies in procedure. Claire shut her mouth, but her eyes burned. Gray Lake Home sat 20 minutes outside Pine Hollow, behind a row of white pines planted too evenly to look natural. The building was low and beige, with wide windows, trimmed shrubs, and a sign carved with cheerful letters. Greylac Senior Wellness Residence. Warm yellow light spilled through the lobby windows. A wreath still hung on the door, though Christmas had passed weeks ago. It should have looked comforting. Instead, it looked rehearsed. Inside, the air smelled of lemon disinfectant, powdered soap, and artificial vanilla from a plug-in warmer behind the reception desk. Soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers. Framed prints of lakes and covered bridges lined the walls. Every surface was clean. Too clean. Not sterile like a hospital. Polite. Managed. A place where distress had been trained to lower its voice. The receptionist, a young man with round glasses and a nervous smile, checked Marin's name. He glanced at Ranger and hesitated. "He's controlled," Elias said. "Retired K-9. We stay in public areas unless cleared." The young man looked relieved to be given language he could repeat. "Public areas only." Ranger sat at Elias's side, still as carved stone. Then Helen Ward appeared from the east corridor. Helen was 56. Tall enough to seem severe, though she was only about 5'5", with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun and a face that had forgotten how to welcome strangers. Her white nursing blouse was buttoned to the throat over a gray sweater, and a name tag reading H. Ward caught the lobby light. A large ring of keys hung from her belt, but the metal made almost no sound because strips of red cloth had been wrapped around the loop to keep them quiet. Elias noticed that a woman who silenced her keys in a nursing home still cared who slept. "Marin," Helen said. Helen. The two women looked at one another with the complicated dislike of people who had once shared a warning and chosen different kinds of fear. "We're here to see Edith Malloy," Marin said. Helen's eyes moved to Claire, then Elias, then Ranger. "Mrs. Malloy tires easily." "So does the truth," Elias said. "Still comes due." Helen did not smile, but when Marin said Walter Finch's name, something changed in the set of her mouth. "5 minutes," Helen said. She led them down a corridor with pale green walls and handrails polished by hundreds of passing palms. Elias and Ranger remained near the public sitting area at first, but Helen paused halfway and looked back. "The dog can come to the doorway," she said. "Mrs. Malloy likes animals." Ranger stopped, not abruptly enough to alarm the receptionist, but completely enough that Elias felt the leash go still. The dog turned his head toward a locked records door at the end of a short side corridor. His ears rose, his nose lowered. He did not growl. He only stood there, staring at that door as if behind it someone had folded fear into paper and stacked it in boxes. Helen saw it. For half a second, the hard mask slipped from her face. Then she leaned closer to Marin and murmured without moving her lips much, "Camera, on this hall resets at Sauzo Bon Muy. It goes black for 3 minutes. I didn't tell you that." Amanda was not there to hear it. Elias was. He said nothing. Helen walked on. Room 214 was small, neat, and too warm. A narrow bed stood beside the window. A vase of plastic tulips sat on the sill. On the bedside table were a water cup, 2 untouched pudding containers, and a small tin of peppermint candies. Edith Malloy sat in a reclining chair with a crocheted blanket over her knees. She was 82, very thin, with white hair gathered loosely at the back of her head, and skin so pale it seemed the blue veins beneath it were remembering rivers. Her eyes were gray-blue, cloudy at first glance, but not empty. They moved slowly across each visitor, pausing longest on Ranger. "Christmas is late," Edith said. Marin knelt beside her chair. "Hello, Edith. It's Marin." Edith looked at her. The cat hid in the choir loft. Claire's face fell. Marin did not push. "That sounds like a clever cat." He hated the trumpets. Ranger stepped carefully into the room when Elias gave permission. The German shepherd lowered his head and placed his muzzle near Edith's hand, not touching until she moved first. Edith's fingers, thin and trembling, settled on the bright streak of gold along his muzzle. Her eyes cleared, not fully, not like a curtain lifted, more like a candle surviving a draft. "Walter's dog?" she whispered. "No," Elias said softly. "Mine." Walter said a dog would know who was afraid. Marin glanced at Elias. Claire leaned closer. "Mrs. Malloy, my father is in the hospital. He sent us." Edith's fingers tightened slightly in Ranger's fur. "They moved Arthur after he signed. They moved Grace after her son came asking. They told me my niece forgot me." A small, bitter smile crossed her mouth. "My niece sends ugly scarves every birthday. She never forgets anything." Marin's eyes filled. Edith turned toward the bedside table. "Candy." Marin picked up the peppermint tin. "No," Edith said. Under Elias lifted the tin. Beneath it was a square of folded tissue. Inside lay a tiny brass key, old and dark at the teeth. Claire covered her mouth. Edith whispered, Walter said if the road took him before Sunday, give it to the man who stopped. Elias felt the room tilt slightly. He had stopped because Ranger forced him to see. But Walter, somehow, had prepared for a man he did not know. What does it open? Elias asked. Edith's gaze drifted toward the corner of the ceiling where a camera sat behind smoked plastic. Her voice dropped so low they had to lean in. The organ cabinet, St. Mark's before Sunday. A bell chimed in the hallway. Helen appeared at the door almost immediately. Time. Behind her, a male security aide stood with crossed arms. He was young, broad and bored in the way hired muscle, often is before it learns what kind of story it has entered. Helen's voice stayed cold. Mrs. Malloy needs rest. Marin slipped the key into her palm, and then into her pocket. No one argued. That was the rule now. Leave before the right thing became the wrong method. In the lobby, Helen did not look at them as they passed. But as Elias stepped by, she said quietly, some doors close louder than they open. Outside, the cold felt honest. They reached Marin's blue minivan under the parking lot light. She stopped before opening the door. What? Claire asked. Marin crouched. A thin cut ran along the sidewall of the front tire, not deep enough to flatten it at once, deep enough to fail at speed. Marin sat back on her heels, face white. Elias scanned the parking lot. Ranger stood rigid beside him, eyes moving from car to car, nose working against the wind. Claire whispered, someone knew we were here. Elias looked toward the clean windows of Gray Lake, where the plastic tulips and painted lake scenes glowed warmly behind glass. His phone rang. Amanda Reyes. Elias answered. Mercer. Amanda's voice was clipped, but beneath it he heard anger. I just got a call from records. Jonah Reed's accident file is missing from county archive. Not misplaced. Removed. Elias closed his eyes. The old name opened inside him like a wound that had never scarred. Across the lot, Ranger gave a low, steady breath. Not quite a growl, not quite a warning. Elias looked at Gray Lake again and understood that Walter's list had not begun with Walter. It had begun years ago, with a call he never answered. St. Mark's Church looked smaller in the late afternoon than it did in memory. Claire Finch had not noticed that until she stood at the bottom of the front steps with the brass key in her palm. The church was white clapboard, old and slightly bowed by decades of wind, with a steeple that leaned just enough to seem tired rather than broken. Bare oak branches scratched softly against the sky behind it. The stained glass windows held the last dull light of winter like colored water trapped in stone. Elias Mercer stood beside her, Ranger at his left knee. The German shepherd's olive harness was snug across his black and gold coat. He had been quiet since they left Gray Lake, but not at ease. His ears moved at every sound. A car passing on the road, the church sign creaking, Claire's uneven breathing. The small notch on his right ear made him look battle-worn, while the bright streak of gold down his muzzle caught the fading light each time he raised his head. Trooper Amanda Reyes pulled in behind them in an unmarked state vehicle. She stepped out with a hard evidence case in one hand and her black notebook tucked beneath her arm. Her face carried no visible surprise, no wasted emotion. But the way her eyes moved across the church, then to the road, then to Claire's hand, made it clear. She understood they were not simply opening an old cabinet. They were walking into the place where Walter Finch had hidden the piece of himself no one had believed. The church door opened before Claire could knock. Pastor Glenn Harrow stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. He was 64, round-faced and broad through the stomach, with silver hair combed carefully over a bald spot that fooled no one but remained a loyal effort. His cheeks were pink from either the cold or nervousness, and his wire-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose. He had the warm, startled look of a man who had spent a life comforting grief, but still hated seeing it arrive on time. Claire, he said softly. She tried to answer, but her throat closed. Pastor Glenn reached out and covered her hand with both of his. He did not ask how Walter was. People asked that when they wanted hope to do the work of facts. Instead, he said, your father left instructions with me last month. Claire looked up. He said if anything happened to him before Sunday, you were to be allowed into the organ cabinet. He made me promise not to ask why. Amanda stepped forward. Pastor Harrow, I need to document access. No one touches anything inside until I photograph it. The pastor blinked behind his glasses. Of course. I've never been good at mysteries anyway. They make me sweat in the vestments. Elias almost smiled. Almost. Inside, St. Mark smelled of old wood, candle wax, dust, and hymnals, handled by generations of nervous fingers. The sanctuary was empty except for the soft ticking of the heating pipes. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the pulpit. At the front, the organ sat in shadow, its polished face worn smooth where Walter's hands had opened and closed it for years. Claire stopped halfway down the aisle. I told him he was imagining things, she whispered. Elias did not answer quickly. There were certain confessions that did not need interruption. They needed space to fall. He kept saying people were disappearing while still alive, she continued. I told him he was getting dramatic. That old age made every change look like a threat. Pastor Glenn lowered his eyes. He came here after evening practice sometimes, the pastor said. Sat at the bench without playing. I thought he was praying. Maybe he was, Elias said. Claire looked at him. Some prayers are just a man trying not to give up. They reached the organ. Behind the bench was a low-side cabinet with paneled doors and a brass lock darkened by age. Claire knelt, but her hands trembled so badly the keys scraped once against the metal. Amanda waited. Elias waited. Ranger sat beside Claire, not touching her, just near enough that his quiet weight entered the air. Claire glanced at him, drew one breath, and tried again. The key turned. The lock opened with a small, dry click. Amanda raised her phone and photographed the cabinet before Claire pulled the doors wide. Inside were stacks of sheet music tied with string, a box of old choir pencils, 2 cracked leather hymnals, and beneath a loose wooden panel, a narrow compartment. Claire stared at it. My grandfather built that, she said. Dad said he used to hide rare music in there. Amanda put on gloves. Elias stepped back, forcing himself not to reach first. Old instincts wanted to move, control, secure. But this was not his cabinet. Not his father, not his evidence to claim. Amanda lifted the panel. Inside lay a cloth bundle wrapped in a faded handkerchief, a white handkerchief, embroidered with a tiny blue F in one corner. Claire pressed her fingers to her mouth. That's his. Amanda opened the bundle carefully. A small notebook, a cassette tape, several folded document copies, a list of names with dates written beside them, and one page with only 2 words at the top, Jonah Reed. Elias felt his body go still, not tense, empty, as if a cold wind had stepped through his ribs and found a room waiting there. Amanda noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes were built for noticing what people wish to hide. You know that name, she said. Elias did not answer. Not yet. Pastor Glenn led them to the fellowship room, a small space behind the sanctuary with folding chairs, a long table, a coffee urn, and faded photographs of church picnics from years when everyone looked younger, and nobody knew which griefs were already on the road toward them. Amanda documented every item before sealing the originals. She allowed Claire to hold only the handkerchief. Then Pastor Glenn brought out an old cassette player from the choir storage closet. It was dusty, beige, and large enough to suggest another century. He set it on the table like an offering. My youth group used to record Christmas skits on this, he said. The angels were always too close to the microphone. No one laughed, but the attempt mattered. Amanda inserted the tape using gloved hands. This is for identification only. We stop if the tape degrades. The player clicked. A hiss filled the room. Then Walter Finch's voice emerged, thin but unmistakably his. If this is being heard, Walter said, then either I have lost my nerve, lost my memory, or lost more blood than I intended. Claire made a broken sound and clutched the handkerchief. Walter continued, I am not confused. I am old, which people often mistake for the same thing when it is convenient. The names in my book are people who signed over homes, land, or power of attorney shortly before being moved to Gray Lake Home or having family visits restricted. Paper rustled on the recording. Calvin Rusk is not working alone. Deputy Dale Harker has closed complaints without review. Gray Lake administration has altered records. I do not know how far it reaches. I know only that fear has become a business in Pine Hollow. Amanda's face hardened. Elias listened with his jaw locked. Then Walter's voice changed. There was another man before me, Jonah Reed. He saw the first pattern because he repaired porch rails for people Calvin wanted out of their houses. Jonah brought me 2 names. Then he died in a single vehicle accident on a clear road. The room became airless. Elias could hear the cassette turning. A slow mechanical breath. The dog rose from the floor and walked to Elias without command. He pressed his head against Elias's left hand, exactly where Elias's fingers had curled around the leather bracelet on his wrist. Elias had not realized he was touching the small metal fragment marked JR until Ranger made him feel it. For 1 second, the past and present stood in the room together. The old tape, the injured organist, the dead teammate, the dog who would not let him disappear into silence again. Walter's voice went on. If Elias Mercer ever hears this, tell him Jonah was not angry. He said Elias was a man drowning on dry land, and drowning men do not always hear the shore calling. Elias closed his eyes. Claire looked at him, stunned. Amanda did not write anything. Even she seemed to understand this was not a note-taking moment. The tape hissed. Still, Walter said, Jonah called him because he believed Elias would come if he understood. I am calling now in the only way an old man can. If I do not reach the police, if I do not reach my daughter, if I do not reach Sunday, then let this reach someone who still knows how to stop. The cassette clicked softly as the recording ended. For a long moment, nobody moved. Elias felt Ranger's head still under his hand. He felt Claire watching him, not with accusation yet, but with the terrible curiosity of a daughter learning that her father's secret had touched another man's buried wound. Amanda finally spoke. Mr. Mercer. Elias opened his eyes. She did not ask gently. Amanda Reyes did not waste softness where truth was needed. How do you know Jonah Reed? Elias looked at the table, at the cassette, at Walter's handkerchief. We served together, he said. Pastor Glenn removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Elias continued, voice low. After we got out, Jonah settled near Pine Hollow. He fixed houses, steps, roofs, doors that wouldn't close right. Mostly for old folks who paid him in pies and bad coffee. Claire whispered, my father knew him, apparently. And you? Elias's fingers tightened around the bracelet. He called me one night, years ago. Rain coming down hard enough to shake the windows. I saw his name on my phone. He swallowed. I didn't answer. The fellowship room seemed to shrink. I was drinking then, not every day, just enough days to lie about it. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't talking to anyone. Jonah left a message saying something was wrong here. Said he needed me to call back that night. Claire's face softened despite herself. Elias looked at her. I listened the next morning. By then he was dead. No one offered comfort. That was mercy. Comfort given too early can feel like theft. Amanda closed the evidence case. Harker handled that file. Elias nodded. And now it's missing. The church door opened somewhere beyond the fellowship room. Pastor Glenn frowned. We're closed. A soft, familiar voice called from the sanctuary. Pastor, it's only me. Ruth Bellamy appeared carrying her pale blue cake tin. She looked smaller in the church than she had at the hospital. Her lavender cardigan was buttoned neatly over a flowered dress, and her silver curls were pinned with the same pearl clip. Her face was kind, round, and damp-eyed, the face of a woman who had spent decades arriving with casseroles whenever death or surgery visited someone else's house. I'm sorry, she said. I thought I'd leave something for tomorrow's community meeting. Then she saw the cassette player on the table. Her smile faltered. Walter's handkerchief lay in Claire's hand. Ruth's gaze moved from it to Elias, then to Ranger. The dog did not growl. He only lifted his head and sniffed once, slowly, toward the hem of Ruth's coat. Ruth's fingers tightened around the cake tin handle. Amanda saw it. Elias saw it. Claire, too deep in grief, did not. We're in the middle of something, Pastor Glenn said kindly. Of course. Ruth took one step backward. Of course, I didn't mean to intrude. As she turned, the cake tin bumped against the doorframe. The lid shifted. Inside, pale frosting smeared against one side, ruined from being carried by unsteady hands. From Amanda's phone came a sharp alert. She looked at the screen. Then she opened an image file sent by the traffic unit. Camera from the feed store near Route 19, she said. Everyone gathered around except Ruth, who had stopped near the hallway. The image was grainy, washed by fog, but clear enough to show a dark blue older model truck turning off Route 19 minutes after the likely impact. Mud obscured most of the plate. The driver was not visible. On the rear window was a small white decal, across an open hymn book. St. Mark's Church. Claire inhaled sharply. Pastor Glenn whispered, Several people have those. Elias looked up. Ruth Bellamy was no longer in the doorway. Only the faint smell of sugar and vanilla remained, and beyond it, the sound of the side door closing softly into the winter air. By the next afternoon, St. Mark's Church was full of people who had come to hear about a lakefront project and found themselves sitting inside something much older than business. The sanctuary smelled of polished wood, winter coats, coffee from the fellowship room, and the faint sweetness of Ruth Bellamy's cakes arranged near the back table. Outside, the sky hung low and white over Pine Hollow. Inside, every pew seemed to creak beneath the weight of polite suspicion. At the front, a folding easel held glossy drawings of Calvin Rusk's proposed development. Clean walking paths, cheerful cottages, wellness center, a lakeside garden where elderly residents smiled beneath impossible summer trees. The drawings showed no lawyers, no locked doors, no frightened old people, being told their own children no longer wished to see them. Calvin Russ stood beside the display like a man who had been born knowing where the light fell best. He wore a dark charcoal suit beneath his camel coat, a white shirt, and the same burgundy scarf folded with careful softness. His blonde gray hair was combed back neatly, and his smile held the room without seeming to ask for it. He was not handsome in a wild or memorable way. He was handsome in the way expensive furniture is handsome, smooth, polished, meant to reassure people that money had already decided what was tasteful. Deputy Dale Harker sat 2 rows behind him, hat resting on his knee, tan sheriff's jacket open over his brown uniform. His face looked calm, his mustache trimmed, his cinnamon gum moving slowly at one cheek. He seemed like a man attending a civic meeting out of duty, not a man whose name had begun appearing in sealed evidence bags. Near the front sat Claire Finch, her slate blue coat buttoned tight, one hand resting on the handle of her father's wheelchair. Walter Finch looked smaller under the church lights. His right arm was bound in a cast. A pale bandage showed at his temple. The hospital had objected to him leaving, then objected harder when he insisted. In the end, Dr. Park allowed it only because Claire signed forms, Amanda arranged transport, and Walter threatened to haunt the cardiac wing by playing hymns off-key after death. He was weak, but not dim. His eyes moved across the sanctuary, pausing on faces he had known for decades. Marin Doyle sat behind him, her teal scrub jacket replaced by a beige coat, though the hospital ID still hung forgotten from her pocket. Her hair was tied back more carefully today, but her hands gave her away. They kept closing around her phone. Pastor Glenn had announced that the meeting would be recorded for housebound members who could not attend. Marin was the one holding the recording device, and she held it as if it weighed more than metal and glass. Elias Mercer sat at the back with Ranger. He had chosen the last pew because old training preferred walls behind him and exits in view. Ranger lay beside his boots, olive harness across his black and gold coat, eyes half-lidded but not asleep. The German shepherd's ears moved whenever Harker shifted, whenever Calvin laughed softly, whenever someone whispered the word, Walter. Troy Kellerman stood near the side aisle, no phone in his hand this time. He wore the same gray jacket from Route 19, but his face looked different. Shame had not left him. It had simply taught him posture. He kept glancing toward the back door, where 2 state investigators stood in plain coats. One of them was a broad black man in his late 40s named Marcus Bell, with close-cropped hair, a square chin, and the patient expression of a man who had learned that truth often arrived late and defensive. Beside him was investigator Aaron Vale, 36, pale, sharp-eyed, with auburn hair tucked behind one ear and a notebook balanced against her forearm. They did not interrupt. They watched. Amanda Reyes stood against the wall near the pulpit, hands folded in front of her, face unreadable. Pastor Glenn opened the meeting with prayer, but his voice shook once when he said, "Guide us toward truth." Perhaps he knew truth had teeth. Calvin began smoothly. "Pine Hollow is changing," he said, warm enough to sound sorrowful. And change frightens people, especially those who have given their whole lives to a place and fear that the place is moving on without them. Several people nodded. That was Calvin's gift. He could make agreement feel like compassion. He spoke of safety, of housing, of preserving dignity for seniors. He spoke of Gray Lake as a partner in transitional care and Rusk Development Trust as a steward of legacy properties. He never said profit. He never said pressure. He never said that old people with failing memories were easier to move than oak trees. Then his tone shifted slightly. There has been recently a great deal of anxiety stirred by documents taken out of context. I would never accuse any injured gentleman of malice. But fear can turn confusion into certainty. Claire's hand tightened on Walter's wheelchair. Calvin did not look at Walter when he said it. That made it worse. Walter raised his left hand. The church fell quiet before Pastor Glenn even reached the microphone. Walter's voice was thin, but the sanctuary carried it. "I am old," he said. "That part is true." A few nervous chuckles moved through the pews. "I forget where I put my glasses. I call the television remote a clicker and refuse to apologize. Sometimes I walk into a room and have to ask God why I came there." This time the laughter was warmer, sadder. Walter looked at Calvin. "But I have not forgotten what fear looks like when it sits across from me holding a pen." The room stilled. Walter continued. "I watched friends lose homes after signing papers they did not understand. I watched sons and daughters told their parents were sleeping when they were wide awake. I watched people move behind doors because they asked why their names were on documents they never read." Calvin's smile remained, but the skin around his eyes tightened. Walter's fingers trembled around the folded page Amanda had allowed him to carry, a copy, not an original, one small portion of his notebook. The old do not fear death as much as the young imagine, Walter said. We fear becoming inconvenient while still alive. We fear speaking and watching good people look away because believing us would disturb dinner. The sentence traveled through the pews. A woman lowered her eyes. A man in a work coat removed his cap. Even Harker stopped chewing. Then Walter read the page. Dates, initials, meetings, Gray Lake transfers after property signings. A note beside one name. Family visit denied same week deed recorded. Harker stood. Pastor, this is inappropriate. These are unverified accusations. Amanda moved one step from the wall. Deputy Harker, sit down. People turned. Harker looked at her. Trooper, this is a community meeting, and now it is part of an active state investigation. A ripple went through the church. Calvin lifted one hand, still calm. No one here wants conflict. Walter has been through trauma. It is natural for him to seek patterns. Then he looked toward the back pew. Mr. Mercer knows something about trauma, I imagine. Elias did not move. Calvin's voice softened, almost tender. A man can stop on a road for many reasons. Courage, certainly. Or guilt. Sometimes one act of rescue is just a man trying to answer a phone he ignored years too late. The room seemed to lose sound. Claire turned halfway, stunned. Amanda's eyes sharpened. Elias felt Ranger rise beside him before he felt his own breath return. Calvin had not merely guessed at Elias's wound. He had named it. In a church full of people, he had reached into a sealed room inside Elias's chest and opened the door like he had been given a key. Ranger stood between Elias's knees and the aisle, not threatening, not barking, only upright and utterly still. Elias's hand lowered to the dog's neck. Easy, he whispered. Ranger obeyed bait, but his eyes stayed on Calvin. For a moment, Elias wanted to cross the church, not to strike Calvin. He was too old and too trained to mistake violence for justice. But some part of him wanted to stand close enough that Calvin would have to smell the truth he had tried to weaponize. Instead, Elias remained seated. That restraint traveled through the room more powerfully than anger would have. Walter looked back at Elias. There was sorrow in the old man's face, but not accusation. Calvin saw that his arrow had hit, but not failed. Amanda stepped forward. Calvin Rusk, Deputy Harker, and Gray Lake Home are now subjects of a state inquiry involving suspected elder coercion, document manipulation, and obstruction relating to prior complaints. Deputy Harker, I need your department-issued phone. Harker's face darkened. You don't have authority to seize. Marcus Bell moved from the side wall, opening his coat enough for the badge at his belt to show. We do. Erin Vale already had a folded order in her hand. The sanctuary erupted into whispers. Marin's phone continued recording from the front pew, not hidden, not theatrical. The red light was small, steady, legal under Pastor Glenn's earlier announcement. She was not catching a confession. She was catching a town losing the privilege of saying it had never heard. Harker stepped into the aisle as if intending to leave. Troy moved before anyone asked him. He stepped from the side aisle and stood near the back door, joined by two older men from the choir and the hardware store man who had stopped on Route 19. None of them touched Harker. None threatened him. They simply stood there, bodies in the path, faces pale but determined. Troy's hands shook, but they were empty. No phone, no shield of glass, just hands. Harker looked at them with disgust. Move. Troy swallowed. No, sir. It was not a loud word. It did not need to be. Amanda said, Deputy, don't make this worse. Harker looked at Calvin. Calvin did not look back. That told Elias more than any confession. Calvin's turned instead toward Amanda, smile still carefully alive. Trooper Reyes, I will cooperate fully. I only hope your investigation is not being guided by wounded imaginations. Amanda's gaze did not flicker. It's being guided by documents, witnesses, financial filings, and a missing accident file. For the first time, a murmur of anger rose from the congregation. Claire bent closer to Walter. Dad breathed. Walter's eyes were on Calvin. Calvin stepped down from the front slowly, adjusting his scarf as if the entire matter were an inconvenience to be handled by better tailoring. As he passed Elias's pew, he leaned just enough that only Elias could hear. You think I drove that truck? Elias looked at him. Calvin's smile was gone now. What remained beneath it was pale and dry. No, Mercer. The person who put Walter in that ditch is sitting in this church, and all of you have eaten her cakes for 20 years. Elias's eyes moved before he chose them to. Calvin's gaze had cut toward the window-side pews. There, Ruth Bellamy stood halfway up. Her pale blue cake tin rested against her knees. She had not opened it. Her lavender cardigan looked too soft for the terror on her face. Beside her sat a young man Elias had not noticed before. Noah Bellamy was 19, thin and long-limbed, with messy light brown hair under a dark cap marked with the logo of Rusk Auto and Service. His hoodie was oil-stained, his jeans dark at the knees, and a red and black shop rag hung from his back pocket. He had the face of someone still young enough to be frightened by adults, but old enough to understand that fear could destroy evidence. Noah stared at the floor. His cap trembled in his hands. Ruth looked at Walter, not at Calvin, not at Amanda, at Walter. Her eyes filled with such horror that the whole church seemed to understand before anyone spoke. Walter's face changed slowly, not into rage. Rage would have been easier. His expression became something deeper and more unbearable. It was the look of a man realizing that the sound he had heard from the ditch, the engine that left, the tires that carried away his last chance at being seen, had not belonged to a stranger. It had belonged to someone who had once brought him lemon cake after his wife's funeral. The church held its breath. Ranger stood beside Elias, silent, and in that silence, Ruth Bellamy began to cry. Ruth Bellamy did not confess like a villain. She confessed like a woman whose bones had finally become too tired to hold up a lie. For a long moment after Calvin Rusk's words fell into the sanctuary, no one moved. The church seemed to hold its breath around Ruth. Even the old heating pipes stopped their knocking, as if St. Mark's itself had leaned close to hear what grief would do next. Ruth stood beside the window pew with her pale blue cake tin pressed against her skirt. She was 68, short and round-shouldered, with silver curls pinned by a pearl clip and a lavender cardigan buttoned over a flowered dress. Her face had always been the kind people trusted before thinking. Soft cheeks, wet blue eyes, a mouth shaped by years of saying, "Take another slice, honey." Small burn marks dotted her hands from decades of pulling pies and casseroles from ovens for funerals, baptisms, and lonely widowers. Now those hands shook so badly the cake tin rattled. Beside her, Noah Bellamy kept his head bowed. At 19, he looked too young to carry what he knew, and too old to pretend he did not carry it. His light brown hair stuck out from beneath the Rusk Auto and Service cap in nervous tufts. His hoodie was stained with oil at the cuffs, and a red and black shop rag hung from one back pocket. He had the thin, unfinished build of a boy, still growing into manhood, but his eyes had already learned the exhausted fear of adults. Walter Finch stared at Ruth from his wheelchair. His face did not harden. That made it worse. Anger would have given the church somewhere to stand. Walter's pain left everyone without a floor. Claire bent beside him. "Dad?" Walter raised his left hand slightly, not to comfort her, to ask for silence. Amanda Reyes moved first. Her voice was calm but carried across the sanctuary. "Mrs. Bellamy, you do not have to speak here. If you have information related to Mr. Finch's injury, we can take a formal statement." Ruth looked at Amanda as if formal statements belonged to another world, a clean world with desks and pens and people who had not heard an old man hit the ground. "I heard the bicycle," Ruth whispered. A sound moved through the pews. Ruth closed her eyes. "I heard it fall." Noah flinched like she had struck him. Calvin stood near the aisle, his face again composed, but something bright and cruel had settled in his eyes. He had done what men like him often did when trapped. He had opened another person's wound and stepped behind it. Elias Mercer remained at the back beside Ranger. His hand rested on the German shepherd's neck. Ranger stood silent, black and gold coat still, amber eyes fixed not on Ruth but on Noah, not accusing, watching. Ruth's voice trembled. That morning, Henry was having one of his bad spells. She looked toward Pastor Glenn, perhaps because the truth felt easier when addressed to a man who had heard many sins and survived them. "My husband thought someone was chasing us. He kept pulling at the door handle. He was shouting that we had to go home, but we don't know how long we'll have a home." Henry Bellamy had not appeared in church for months. People knew he had dementia, but most knew it the way a town knows tragedy. Enough to send food, not enough to sit through the night. Ruth continued. "I hadn't slept, maybe 2 hours, maybe less. Calvin's office had called again about the house. The hospital bill came the day before. Henry was crying like a child in the passenger seat." Her face crumpled, but she forced the words through. "I came around the bend too fast. Walter was there with his bicycle. I didn't hit him square. I swear before God I didn't. The mirror clipped him, or the side of the truck did, I don't know. I heard metal. I heard him cry out." Walter's eyes closed. Claire covered her mouth. Ruth opened hers, but no sound came. Pastor Glenn stepped toward her, then stopped, understanding that this was not a moment to rescue her from what she had done. I looked back, Ruth said. I saw him in the ditch. Silence. I was going to stop. That sentence broke something in the room, because everyone there had once said a version of it. I was going to call. I was going to help. I was going to come back. But Henry screamed and opened the door halfway. A car behind me honked. I panicked. I told myself I would get Henry to the hospital and then call. Then I told myself someone else had stopped. Then I told myself that if I went back after waiting, it would be worse. She looked at Walter, and every minute I waited made me more afraid of the minute before it. Quiet and devastating. Not a new clue, not a shouted twist, but the terrible shape of human cowardice revealed in plain language. Ruth had not become guilty all at once. She had become guilty minute by minute, each delay laying one more stone on the door back to mercy. Noah suddenly stepped forward. "Grandma, stop." Ruth shook her head. "No." Noah's voice cracked. "You don't have to say all of it here." "Yes," Ruth said. "I do." She turned toward him, and for the first time the whole church saw that Noah had not merely been afraid for his grandmother. He had been afraid with her. "You saw the truck," Amanda said gently. Noah looked at the floor. Ranger took one step, only one. The movement was soft-controlled, but Noah saw it. The boy looked at the dog, at the notch in his ear, at the bright streak along his muzzle. Something in Ranger's stillness seemed to strip away the last excuse. Dogs have a way of making lies feel childish. Noah reached into the pocket of his oil-stained hoodie and pulled out a folded envelope. "I took pictures," he said. Ruth sobbed once. Noah held the envelope out to Amanda. His hand shook, but he did not pull it back. The truck came into the garage that afternoon. Left headlight cracked. Blue paint scraped off near the mirror. There was blood on the edge of the casing. Not a lot. I didn't know what to do. Amanda took the envelope carefully. "Who brought it in?" Noah looked toward Calvin. "He did." Calvin's expression did not change, but the room did. Noah swallowed. "Mr. Russ said my grandmother was confused. Said if I talked, she'd go to prison, and Grandpa Henry would get dumped in some state facility. He said he'd make sure the house was gone before spring." Ruth bent over the cake tin as if she might collapse into it. "He paid the garage to replace the light and buff the mirror," Noah said. "I kept the old part." Amanda's eyes sharpened. "Where is it?" "At my house, wrapped in a shop rag." Marcus Bell moved beside her. "We'll recover it with your consent." Noah nodded. Tears spilled down his face now, but his voice steadied. "I should have come sooner." Troy Kellerman spoke from near the back door. "Me too." Everyone turned. Troy looked younger than before, almost boyish beneath the weight of the room. He pulled his phone from his pocket, not to record this time, but to offer it. "I still have the video from Route 19. I deleted the short clip I posted to my private story, but the original stayed backed up. It shows the blue truck farther down the bend, and another vehicle behind it. A black pickup." Elias looked at Calvin. Calvin did not look away. Amanda accepted Troy's phone in an evidence sleeve. Marin stood then. Her face was pale, but her voice did not shake. "I'll give my statement on Gray Lake. All of it. The changed charts, the denied visits, the warning I received after I reported." From the aisle, Helen Ward appeared. No one had seen her enter. She wore her white nursing blouse under a long, dark coat, her steel gray hair pinned tight, the cloth-wrapped key ring at her side silent as ever. "I brought copies of night transfer logs," Helen said. Her voice was flat, almost cold, but her eyes were wet. "Not originals. I'm not a fool. But enough to show who was moved after each property signing." Amanda looked at Marcus. The case was no longer one confession. It was becoming a net. Calvin finally spoke. "This is hysteria." Walter opened his eyes. "No," he said. "This is what happens when people stop whispering." Calvin's jaw tightened. Harker, cornered near the aisle, looked at the state investigators and seemed to calculate whether loyalty had any remaining profit. It did not. Amanda stepped toward Ruth. "Mrs. Bellamy, are you willing to come with us and make a formal statement?" Ruth looked at Walter. "Do you hate me?" The question was too small for what it carried. Walter's fingers tightened on the arm of his wheelchair. For a moment the church waited for the easy ending, the beautiful forgiveness, the kind people like, because it lets everyone go home clean. Walter did not give them that. "I can't forgive you today," he said. Ruth nodded as if she had expected the blow and still could not stand under it. "I still hear your truck," Walter continued. "I hear it every time I close my eyes." Claire cried silently beside him. Walter's voice softened, not into pardon, but into something sturdier. "But I will not let Calvin use your fear to bury more people." Ruth covered her face. Amanda took her gently by the arm. Ruth did not resist. Noah followed, carrying his cap in both hands, no longer hiding beneath it. Justice did not arrive like thunder. It came as paperwork, trembling witnesses, sealed envelopes, and people finally standing where they had once driven past. In the weeks that followed, Gray Lake Home was suspended from operation pending investigation. Some residents were moved to safer facilities. Some families found records they had been told did not exist. Calvin Rusk and Deputy Harker were not marched away in chains for a crowd to cheer. Their downfall came through subpoenas, hearings, frozen accounts, and the slow machinery of evidence. It was less satisfying than revenge. It was also more real. Some homes were recovered, some were not. Some elderly residents lived long enough to see their names cleared. Some did not. Pine Hollow learned that truth can come late and still be necessary. Walter survived. He returned to St. Mark's months later, with a cane, one hand slower on the organ keys than before. His hymns sometimes stumbled, but nobody complained. If the notes wavered, the congregation sang louder, which made the music worse and better at the same time. Elias went to Jonah Reed's grave the first clear Sunday after the investigation opened. The cemetery lay beyond a low stone wall, winter grass flattened by frost. Jonah's marker was plain, a name, dates, a small service emblem. No explanation for the unanswered call that had lived inside Elias for years. Ranger lay down beside the grave without command, resting his muzzle between his paws. Elias stood there with a copy of Walter's tape in his hand. He did not make a speech. Speeches were for people who believed words could repair time. He placed the tape at the base of the stone. "La ne toi de ne," he said softly, the words in Vietnamese coming from some old phrase he had once learned from a teammate who said grief needed more than one language. Then, in English, quieter still, this time I heard. Ranger exhaled, slow and steady. Elias understood then that redemption did not erase the past. It only gave a man the chance not to become loyal to his worst moment. Months later, Route 19 changed. A new sign stood near the bend where Walter had fallen. "Do not pass suffering by." Not everyone liked it. One county official said it sounded too emotional for a road sign. Walter, leaning on his cane at the dedication, said, "The old signs were very calm. See how well that worked." People laughed because they needed to. Spring came thin and green over Pine Hollow. Grass covered the ditch. The maples put out small leaves. The road still carried commuters, delivery vans, impatient men, tired mothers, frightened boys, and good people who would be tested when goodness became inconvenient. One afternoon, Elias drove Route 19 with Ranger in the passenger seat. Ahead, traffic slowed. Elias's hand moved toward the wheel, alert. Then he saw why. A young woman had stopped her car near the shoulder. She was helping a lost brown and white dog away from the road, speaking softly while another driver stood behind her vehicle with hazard lights blinking. A third person stepped out with a leash. No one honked, not at first. Elias looked at Ranger. "Well," he said, "looks like the world learned to break today." Ranger breathed out through his nose, unimpressed but approving enough. Elias smiled and drove on slowly. Because strength was never the absence of fear. Strength was the moment fear told a person to keep going, and conscience put a hand on the brake. And sometimes, if grace was stubborn enough, one old man, one guilty town, and one loyal dog could teach a road to remember. In the end, this story reminds us that not every miracle arrives with thunder, light, or angels descending from the sky. Sometimes, a miracle looks like an old truck slowing down on a cold road. Sometimes, it looks like a wounded man still breathing in a ditch. Sometimes, it looks like a loyal dog refusing to let his owner look away. God does not always stop suffering before it happens. But sometimes, he places someone nearby who is still willing to stop, still willing to listen, still willing to step out of comfort and into another person's pain. Elias could not change the night he failed to answer Jonah's call. Walter could not erase the sound of the cars that passed him by. Ruth could not undo the moment fear made her keep driving. But grace does not always come by erasing the past. Sometimes grace comes by giving broken people one more chance to choose differently, and maybe that is the lesson for all of us. Every day we pass small roadside tragedies, not always a man in a ditch. Sometimes it is an elderly neighbor who has gone quiet, a lonely veteran sitting alone in a diner, a tired nurse hiding tears behind a smile, a child being ignored, a stray dog waiting by the road, a family member calling, not loudly, but just enough to be heard if we are willing to listen. The world teaches us to keep moving. God teaches us to notice. So the next time life gives you a chance to stop, to help, to call, to listen, or simply to stand beside someone who feels forgotten, do not wait for someone else to become the answer. You may be the person God placed there for that very moment. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you want more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and the quiet miracles between people and animals, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your heart, and place good people beside you whenever the road feels cold and lonely.